So we're ready to start. David, are you here?
Hello, yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, pretty well. We are about to start, and I have a great pleasure to introduce David Spencer, the author of a bestseller in Ukraine, Gateway. Now it is the second edition. Dave has been to Ukraine twice so far. The first time, if I am not mistaken, was in spring or in winter 2011, and the second time was summer 2016. And I remember that you promised to come again to Ukraine in 2019. Am I right?
I hope so. You never know, but that's my plan, yeah.
Okay, we are ready to start. The floor is yours. We'll enjoy your talk.
Great, good. First question then. Can everybody see me now? Can you see me? Waving my hands? Good. And I imagine that also means that you can hear me. Brilliant, that's great news. Thank you for joining me today. There's lots of people here, and I can see that there's lots of people from literally all over the country, which is brilliant. Yes, I have been to Ukraine twice now. I hope to be back in 2019. But it's always nice to do these webinars, especially for Ukraine. I think this is the second or possibly third webinar that I have done for Ukraine this year. Aliona is asking if there is sound. Can everybody hear me? Yes or no? Yes. So it might be just to your computer. Check your volume. You might need to put your volume higher if necessary. Right, you can see the title of my talk is To Speak or Not to Speak. Okay, and what we're looking at, of course, is the oral skills with our students. And I think that oral work is maybe the most difficult thing to do with teenage students. And it can be very frustrating, I think, for teachers. I think we sometimes feel bad because sometimes our students, they might be very good students, they might write very well, they might do reading, but possibly their speaking is not quite as good. And I think that there are possible reasons for this. And I think there's not just one reason, there are maybe lots of different reasons why students don't speak. And what I want to do in this talk is to investigate in the first part of the talk some possible reasons why students don't speak so much English in class. And then in the second half of the talk, I want to give you some practical activities, some practical ideas, some strategies, some tips that we can use to get our students to speak more in English. This talk will be quite interactive. I'll be asking you questions. I'll ask you even to do one or two activities. And so remember, as you are doing, most of you already, in the chat box on the right of your screen, you can add in your answers to my questions there. Okay. Now, before I ask my first questions, I want to show you this statistic, which is very interesting. This is from Madrid, where I live and teach, and this is from lots of research and investigation that the British Council has done in all students who are 15 and 16 in the Madrid area. And if you look at that graph for a second, you will see that there is an interesting difference in the level of the students according to different skills. So, for example, listening is the skill that in general students are the best at, and that's followed by writing and then reading. And I think that it's interesting that speaking is the lowest of the four skills. And again, I think I can explain some reasons why this may be. One interesting thing that you can see from the statistics is that the girls are better at speaking English than the boys. Okay, can you just answer in the chat box? Do you think that would be the same for your classes? In general, do you think girls are better than boys at speaking? Yes, no, or what do you think? Irene thinks yes. Angelina says no, yes. Okay, one interesting statistic that we will see in a minute is actually the question of embarrassment. And that's my first question. And I'm going to give you some interesting information about England in that respect. I've got some questions for you now. And I want you to say if you agree with what my statement says, if you disagree, or if you think that it depends. Now, before we begin, let me just say there is no correct answer. This is your opinion, and then I will give my opinion. We might agree or we might disagree, but it's just so that we think a little bit about the whole area of speaking. And here is my first question, okay? It can be embarrassing for teenage students to speak to their friends in English. Would you say agree, disagree, or it depends? It can be embarrassing for teenage students to speak to their friends in English. Somebody saying agree, depends on the student. Agree, depends, absolutely agree, depends. I would say that most of you are saying that you agree. Now, one thing that is happening already with this talk, we are making big generalizations, okay? That's always difficult. We always have very good students, very good boys, students who are not embarrassed. But the reason that I put this here is I think we forget sometimes that it can be a little bit embarrassing when you are an adolescent to speak in another language. In fact, in England, most boys leave French. They stop studying French. And the reason that they say they stop French is because they find it embarrassing to speak French. Interestingly, boys find it less embarrassing to speak German or to speak Spanish, maybe because French sounds a little bit strange to English people, okay? Now, when I was at school, I loved learning languages. I loved learning French and I loved learning Spanish. But I still remember finding it a little bit strange to talk about certain topics in English with my best friend. And I think that the only reason why I have this here is because it's worth remembering that sometimes students don't speak in English, not because they don't want to, or because they don't like it, or because they don't think it's useful, but maybe sometimes they are just self-conscious and a little bit embarrassed, a little bit shy when they are younger. One thing that I was going to say, this is on the next slide here, this tip. Be aware of the effect of the great speakers in your class. Now, I watch lessons all over the world, and what I always see in every class is that there are always some students who are brilliant. For some reason, maybe they went to America, maybe they went to the UK, maybe they just love speaking English, they speak all the time. Those students are great to have in our class, but we should also remember that sometimes maybe they have the effect of making other people feel more embarrassed or less confident. Because we all do this, don't we? We all compare ourselves with other people. And if you compare yourself to somebody who is a brilliant speaker already, it can sometimes affect our motivation or our embarrassment because we find that we don't speak as well. So I think that it's important to use those great speakers in a careful way. Don't use them all the time. Make it clear that not everybody has to be the same level. And I think that you sometimes need to address this problem because sometimes those great speakers can actually become a problem for certain students. Okay? Again, these are my opinions. I see that a lot of people agree, but don't feel bad to disagree and don't feel bad to argue with me. But I think that it is true. Those great speakers, we need to be careful about using them. Now, number 2, you can motivate students by getting them to realize that one day they may need to speak English to travel or to get a job. Question number 2, do you agree, disagree, or it depends? Natalia says disagree. It depends. A lot of people agree. A lot of people agree. It says depends. I think it depends. I think that we have two different types of motivation. We have short-term motivation and we have long-term motivation. Personally, I think that with teenage students, sometimes long-term motivation is not the most powerful motivation, because for many students, when you are 14, 15, 16, it seems like a long, long way away. It seems very distant that you will need to speak English one day. We know that they will probably need it, but for them, what is maybe more important is the short-term motivation of wanting to do an activity now, today. So I think that the motivation in the world at the moment is very strong to learn to speak English, because the world is a small place and lots of people need to speak English. But I think that we shouldn't expect this type of motivation to always work, because I think it's a long way away. And when you're 15, you cannot imagine working because you're too young. So I will suggest a different type of motivation in a second. Number 3, in a full class, if 4 or 5 students are not doing a speaking activity in English, we should stop the activity. So do you agree, disagree, or it depends? Number 3. Disagree, depends, disagree, never, disagree. Right, well, I agree with you. I think that in a big class of teenage students, there are always some students who will maybe not be doing the activity all the time. Not all of the students will be working 100% in English. That is real life. It would be nice if everybody always spoke in English, but sometimes some students don't. This is not a reason to stop a speaking activity, because if we do this, we will never finish a speaking activity. We will always be stopping and we will never get to the end. I think we have to accept that it's very difficult in a big class to have everybody doing the task all the time. As Svetlana says, it's normal. And I think it's important. The reason I put this is because sometimes I see teachers who say, I don't do speaking in class because some students start doing other things. If you do that, then of course you will never help your students to speak. You need to try, even though you have to accept that not everybody will be doing the task all of the time. As many of you are saying, it's normal, it's real life, and this is how it is. We want as many students as possible to speak, but if not everybody speaks, then we have to accept that and try to do something about it, but we continue with the activity. Right, number 4. We need to have a special seating arrangement in the classroom to do speaking activities. Agree, disagree, or it depends? Number 4. Agree, disagree, it depends, agree. Right, now, the reason that I mention this is because I sometimes see teachers having, the horseshoe shape. Yeah, this is very typical in oral activities. We have the students in like a semicircle. And this is nice because the students can speak to each other. But I have seen some teachers or some teacher trainers saying that this is essential for a speaking class. And of course, I think that that's not true, yeah? That we can do speaking in any typical situation. If you look at this, in my class, this is more or less my class. I don't have a special seating arrangement because I use the class that the students are in for history, for geography, for science. I haven't got time to move everybody's chairs. So I think that it's very simple, yeah? We can do pair work very easily with students simply turning next to each other and with their partner. I think also with speaking, we also need to vary our partners. I think it's one problem in English class is if you are always speaking to the same person, I think we need variety. So of course, another very simple thing that we can do is get students to simply change partners by speaking to the person behind them or in front of them. And I would suggest trying this. At the beginning of the year, the students are getting to know each other, but sometimes they get to know each other too well, and it's good for them to change partners and simply work with somebody else because they have new things to discover from their new partner. Another thing which I do sometimes, which is a little bit more chaotic but is useful from time to time, is changing the whole dynamic of the class. So let me explain my diagram. I have my class with, say, for example, 20 students. Half of the class, I give numbers, for example, from 1 to 10, 1 to 15, 1 to 20. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Then I turn to the other side of the class and I do the same. I give them another number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then, of course, I tell them, first of all, I check who is number 6, who's number 3, who's number 10, who's number 12. They put up their hands and they see who is their new partner. And then I simply tell them, get up, find your new partner and sit down again. And so what we do, we're changing the interaction, we're changing the partners. And I think sometimes this can give new life to your class. Sometimes everything becomes very predictable because the students know each other almost too well. Sometimes students work with their friends, which is good, but I also think that in a classroom, it's very important that everybody works with anybody else. We are a group of students. I don't care if you're friends or not, but I think that you need to be able to work with different people at different times. That's part of growing up, part of being in a classroom, a school, and a university. Very simple. I'm sure lots of you already do this, but I think particularly in the middle of the year, it's good to do this occasionally. There is a little bit of noise for 2 minutes as they change, but to do it from time to time, I think is good because it gives you some fresh air. Okay. By the way, if I go too quickly or too slowly, tell me in the chat box, okay? Number 5, less correction and more praise can encourage teenagers to speak more. Do you agree, disagree, or it depends? Lots of people are saying agree. Some people are saying it depends. I sort of agree, and it also depends. And I can tell you why I think I depend, because right now, at the moment, I have 2 very similar classes, similar age. 2 different levels, though. One is a very low level, and one is a very high level. And I already can see that I'm trying very hard not to correct too much in the low level class, okay? Because I think that at the lower levels and at the lower ages, I really want to encourage my students to speak. If their level is low and they worry about every mistake, in the end, I find that my students stop speaking. They are so afraid of making a mistake that they say that they don't know how to speak and they don't want to speak. I think it's very important to encourage those people. I think that at a very high level, at a very motivated level, at an older level, it's often easy to correct more because those students are good, they want to be perfect, they want to know every little mistake. And I think that then there is a difference between age and level. The higher the level, the more specific is my correction. The lower the level, and often the lower the age, the more I encourage, the more I praise them, the more I say, yes, well done. Maybe it wasn't brilliant, but they explained themselves, they communicated, and that for me was the important thing, okay? So I think it does depend. On the whole, I think we need to give lots of praise. We said before, students are often embarrassed. What we need to do is to make them feel less embarrassed and brave about speaking English. This is a great quotation from a great book. I recommend this book. It's a very good book, Games for Language Learning. The greatest mistake, if oral ability is the aim, is for the learner not to speak at all. This is almost like my mantra. I think this is so important. You will never learn to speak if you don't open your mouth. So let's go for step number 1, which is speaking, saying something. And often with low-level students, I say, do not worry if you make a mistake, but you have to try and say something, okay? So I think it does depend on the level, but as a general rule, it's good with teenagers to encourage them. If I was doing a one-to-one individual class with a businessman or businesswoman, my correction policy would be very different, okay? But I'm talking about large groups of teenagers. Right, number 6. We should force students to speak in English at all times. Agree or disagree? We should force students to speak. Disagree, agree. Right, I will tell you what I think. I disagree. I mean, the word force is a bad word, I think. Force sounds a little bit violent, obligation, and I don't even think it's possible. I think maybe the word encourage would be better. We should encourage students to speak in English at all times. So encouraging is a good thing, I think. Forcing is not very easy and not very realistic, okay? So we should encourage. But from time to time, and I say this because I am a native speaker, sometimes people think that native speakers, we're always using English and the students are always using English 100% of the time. I think that sometimes we can clarify things very quickly with a short use of the student's first language. But we want students to speak as much English as possible, but I don't think we should make students feel terrible if they use their own language, okay? So I think that we need to be, again, realistic. Yeah, motivating, that's the word. Motivating and encouraging, yeah. Forcing doesn't really work. Number 7, the problem with many speaking exercises is that students often don't know what to say, not even in their own language. Do you agree? I think most of you are agreeing with this, and I think this is a very typical problem. This is a very typical problem with speaking and with writing, both productive skills. It's not just how to say it, they don't know what to say, okay? Now, this is the question. We need structure, okay? We need all of these things. We need support, advice, guidance, assistance, and help. And I think the more that we give our students, the better they will speak and the better they will do activities. Now, I think that probably quite a few of you are using Gateway, maybe Gateway 2nd edition. If you do use Gateway 2nd edition, you will know that our speaking page is called Developing Speaking. It's not just speaking, it's developing speaking because we are helping students to do it better. We're giving them structure, advice, help, and language. So when we do speaking in Gateway 2nd edition, we make sure the context is clear. We get them to think of ideas before they do the main task. Also very important for speaking is listening. Okay, now with writing, we often give students a model text. Sometimes with speaking, we forget that it's important to give students a model dialogue. We need to get the students to listen to somebody doing a similar task so that the students know how to do what they are going to do. So this is the structure, this is the guidance. And in Gateway, you'll know that we have the speaking bank, which is really important. For students to do a task, they need to have the language. They need to have the necessary language. This task is a very typical task in First Certificate, but also now in the new CET exam, negotiating tasks. So we need to give them useful language to do this negotiation. And then we also need to give them tips in case they need to do speaking exams because we want them to do them well. So here it has a question. In this type of negotiation activity, it says, when you work with another student, who should speak more, you or your partner? What is the answer to that question? If it's a pair work and negotiation activity, who should speak more, you or your partner? Who do you think? Both. Thank you, Irina. That's the first answer, and it's absolutely perfect. Exactly. 50-50. Now, of course, we know this as teachers, but students sometimes either are very quiet or very dominating. What I said before, some of the students have got excellent speaking, but if they dominate the conversation, it will not get a good mark, okay? So they need to be able to work 50-50 with their partner. So we need to give them tips like this so the students know what to expect. They know what to do. Okay, and then finally at the end, we give them the practice makes perfect tip. We've given them all of the ideas, we've given them all of the language, we've given them an example, we've given them a tip, and then we get them to do this exam type activity, in this case, of negotiation. And one thing before, I mentioned changing partners. One tip, one piece of advice is when you do an activity like the activity on the slide, do it once, then ask the students to change partners and do it again. And just by changing partners, we have a new dynamic and the students will do it better the second time. So why not try that? After doing it once, maybe they did it well, maybe not so well, but giving them the chance to do it a second time with a new partner just means that we can get it even better. Practice makes perfect, as we said before. And I think this is very true. The alternative to a structured approach, do you know the expression in English? Throw them in at the deep end. Yeah, immersion. So we say sometimes with speaking that it's a good idea to have immersion with students. We just give them the task and ask them to do it. I think that the problem with the deep end is that two things can happen. One is that some students sink. Yeah? And that obviously is not good. The other alternative is that some students learn how to swim, but they have a horrible time. Okay, and I think that those students, they do swim, but they have such a horrible time that they start hating speaking in English. So I think that throwing students in at the deep end is not a good idea with teenage students. Again, maybe an older businessman, businesswoman might learn from immersion. But I think that personally, teenage students, it doesn't work very well. And neither of these two pictures are how I want to see my students, either sinking or having a horrible time. Right, now this number is wrong. Sorry, it should say number 8. It's my last question. It's a good idea to motivate students to speak by giving tasks that are game-like, are competitive, and have a specific goal. Would you say you agree, disagree, or it depends? Okay, I can see lots of people agreeing. And for me, this is my main philosophy about speaking with teenagers. I think that activities that are fun often work better. I think activities that have a competitive element, sometimes the competition is not with another student, sometimes the competition is with yourself. But I think competitiveness can be a good objective sometimes. And the last one, a specific goal. And I'm going to give you examples now of very simple activities that have specific goals. And I think a specific goal helps you to get much better speaking results. Okay. Now, what we're going to do now is see some examples of activities that you can watch in any, that you can do in any situation. This activity is a top secret activity. We're not going to do this exactly, but you can see the instructions. These are the instructions to your students, okay? Write down 5 words beginning with the letter G, but don't let anybody see your words, okay? So the students write it down, a piece of paper, but they don't show it. And then the activity is extremely simple. All they have to do is to define their words, and their students, their partner, has to identify the words. I'm going to do this with you, okay? So this is what a student might speak. These are higher level words, but I'm going to define a word, and I want you to write down what the word is. Remember, it begins with G, okay? Now, my word is a simple type of house, but it's made of glass. It's made of windows. And we can grow fruit, flowers, vegetables inside. So what is my word? It's a place, and obviously the word is greenhouse, okay? That was very good. I'll give you another one. This is a place where sometimes people have fish in their houses and they keep them in this thing. Where would you keep small fish? And it begins with G. What is my word? It could be a glass bowl, or what's the name for the special type of fish that people have in their house that are orange or yellow? Any ideas? Yes, that's right. So the word that I was defining was a goldfish bowl. Yeah, so a goldfish bowl. That's very typical in England, people having goldfish bowls or tanks. Now, the activity is incredibly simple. Obviously, at different levels, you can have different level words. You don't need a photocopy, you don't need a computer, you don't need a book. All you need is a bit of imagination, and we have a nice activity. There is a specific goal, and the goal is to find the 5 words. There is a certain element of competition because the students are working in pairs. And there is also a game-like element. It's also a game. Extremely simple, but I always find that this activity works really well. A nice way to warm up your class at the beginning of a lesson. A very similar idea is one that you can find in the Gateway Teachers Resources. This is one of my favorite activities. Have you ever done this? This is the pair crossword, okay? So we've got student A has this half of the crossword, and they have certain answers and certain clues. And then student B has the other half, okay? So you can see that, for example, student B has the word Switzerland, okay? How could the students define Switzerland? If you were going to play this game, how would they define Switzerland? What would your definition be? How would you do that? Any ideas? It's a neutral country. That's a good clue, yeah, because there are not many neutral countries. A country with lots of banks. Excellent, yes. What else do they have in Switzerland? Red flag with a white cross. The country where the watches are produced. Right, excellent, okay. A small country with very delicious chocolate and lots of cheese too, and watches. Right, great. Now, this is a lovely exercise. I love using this pair crossword because you can explain it to the students. Once they begin, then they are free to do it. Maybe they will make some grammatical mistakes, but I don't really worry if they get the right answer. If they get the right answer, they are being communicative. Okay, so very simple, works very well. There is a clear goal, there is a competition, and it's also a game. Okay, remember, do look at the student resource site and the teacher resource site for Gateway, because you've got lots of extra material, lots of crosswords, lots of games. And in fact, here is another one which I have adapted. Okay, have a look at this. This is one of my favorite activities, particularly at the beginning of the year. Okay, so you're pulling my leg, which of course means that you're tricking somebody, that you're fooling somebody. Now, this I do at the beginning of the school year. And what I've got 5 pieces of information, and some of it is true and some of it is not true. So what happens is I give this information to the students, and the students discuss with their partner in English. They discuss what they believe is true and then what they believe is false. Okay, and of course you can get them to ask you questions to find out more information, to see if you are lying or to see if you are telling the truth. Okay, let's play this game very quickly with you. Okay, I want to see if you can tell which ones are true and which ones are false. If you look at number 1, how many people think that number 1 is true? Do you think number 1 is true? Somebody says true, true, untrue, false. Okay, we've got a mixture. Okay, I'll show you if they're true or false at the end of the game. Okay. Number 2, just before the holidays, I went to Kiev to see Liverpool play in the final of the Champions League. Do you think number 2 is true or false? True, false, false, true, false, false. More people think that number 2 is false, I think. Number 3, my son graduated from university a year after he finished his degree. Number 3, true or false? False, false. Some people think it's true. Okay, we have a mixture. Number 4, I went on board a clipper at the Liverpool docks. A clipper is like a very fast yacht, a sailing ship. True, true, false, true. We've got a whole mixture. And number 5, I saw the Chinese terracotta warriors. You know the Chinese terracotta warriors? They appear in many films and documentaries. Okay, would you like to see the answers? Shall I show you the answers? Right, well, I'm going to show you some photographs, okay, so that you can see. You can see that the one in the top left corner, the IKEA furniture with my daughter, was completely true, okay? We were very happy because we managed to make a very simple shelf, but we did it together and it was lots of fun and it was we were very successful. You can see that the sentence about my son was true, so he graduated in the summer, so I'm very proud of him. You can see the ships in Liverpool, but in fact I didn't go on the ships, okay? So I saw them, but I didn't go on board. By the way, I didn't go to Kiev. I'm a big Liverpool supporter. I love Liverpool, and we lost, of course, in Kiev, which was a pity, but unfortunately I didn't go. And then finally, I did see some of the terracotta warriors, okay? So in Liverpool Museum, they had some of the warriors from China, and it was actually a very beautiful exhibition. Right, this is a very simple activity. Again, this appears in the Gateway resources, okay? This is a high-level version for B2+. This shows the same idea, true or false. You can just use one tense if you just want to practice, for example, the past simple, or you can use lots of different tenses, whatever you prefer, whatever is the level of your students. Very easy to adapt. You can use this sheet. That's right. This one, in fact, I think is from B2+, this particular example, but we also have one for B2. A nice activity. You can do it with or without the worksheet, but it's just a nice activity. There is a goal. I think the important thing is having a clear goal. Right, my next example of an activity. This is a very simple activity again, particularly for the start of the year. What I do is I draw on the board 3 or 4 rectangles. So I don't draw the complete phone, but the idea is that you are drawing the screen of a smartphone. And this was an activity that I put on the Macmillan Gateway Facebook page last year. I'll read the instructions, but the idea is very simple. You draw the rectangles on the board and you tell them that the rectangle is their smartphone. And then you tell them to draw 3 selfies or 3 photos that they took this year. The reason that I do drawings is because in my school, the students cannot use their phones in class. So if you want to use a phone, of course, you could use their real phones and their real photos. To be honest, I think it's better if the students draw the pictures, because drawing the pictures is funny, even when you're older, even as an adult. It's funny because the pictures are often bad. Because the pictures are not very good, that means that there is more speculation, which is also a good thing in speaking activities. If we don't know exactly what something is, we can ask questions to discover more. So speculation is good. And the third reason is that while the students are drawing their pictures, very simple pictures, but while they draw their pictures, they are also thinking about what they are going to say. You are giving them thinking time. Okay, so very simply, the students draw 3, 4 selfies or photos, and then they show the photos to their partner, and their partner has to ask them questions to discover what they did in the holidays. It could be the holidays, it could be the weekend, it doesn't have to be holidays, it could be at any time of the year, but it works very nice for the holidays, okay? I think you can use this at any level. I think you can use this with any age. The students will laugh at the pictures, but that's part of the fun, I think, of the activity. And as I say, if the pictures are not very good, then there is a lot more to say, okay? Speculation. So very simple, extremely simple. All you need is the blackboard, chalk, nothing else, and a little bit of imagination, okay? Let's have a look at another activity, okay? We've got time for a few more activities and then I'll be stopping. This is a very simple idea that I love because I love simple ideas. Simple ideas are the best because everybody understands them and you don't need materials. I write these 3 words on the blackboard and then I tell them to think of more question words. Okay, so we've got what, who, how. Can you just type in some more question words? This is very easy, of course, for you, but just so that you don't fall asleep. Why, where, when, yeah, which is a good one. And how many, good many, that's a good one, how many. Sometimes one student says how many, that's another great question, how far. So if a student remembers how, I get them to think of how far, how many, how long is a great question. Whose is a bit more difficult, but yes, another great question word. So let's think of the procedure, okay? One thing, please remember that you will be able to watch this webinar again and you will be able to see all of these ideas again from the recording, okay? But the procedure, so I ask my students to think of as many question words as possible and to write them down. Then I ask students to write one question with each question word they thought of to find out information about their partner, okay? So it could be about their partner in general. It could be about the summer holidays again. It could be about the weekend. It could be about anything, okay? So if they wrote where, obviously the question, where did you go? When did you come back from your holidays? Simple questions, okay? But you're getting them to think of questions. The students interview their partner with their questions. Please notice that in section number 2, you are again giving the students thinking time. That's one really important thing to always remember, thinking time. We need to give students thinking time. The students interview their partner, and then this is very important. For feedback, I often do this. I often say, ask students to tell you about their partner. And I think that we talked about embarrassment. Sometimes it's embarrassing to talk about yourself in public, and I think it's less embarrassing to talk about somebody else. So I also do this. I tell them to give me one interesting thing they found about their partner. And this also gives us more speaking, a little bit less embarrassment, and it also proves that they did the task because they need to have asked their partner questions. So there's lots of reasons to do section 4. And finally, and I think this is important too for speaking, and I believe for me this is really important, I believe that if we ask our students personal questions, we should be ready as teachers to answer the same personal questions. I think we need to set a good example. If we want an open, communicative classroom, we need to be an example for our students. And I think our students are interested in knowing about us. If the question is too personal, then of course the students should also not be forced to answer the questions. So I think that if we want good communication and a good atmosphere in the class, I think we need to be a good example. And as Oksana is saying there, I think that students are really genuinely interested in us as human beings, not just as a teacher. And as Elena says, not about my age. And I think that's the thing. There are certain things that you do not want to talk about and you explain why not. But it's good to be a good example to your students. It's also very good listening practice, okay? Because they are listening to a real English speaker telling them something similar. You are a model for your students in many ways. Okay, and then just a last, sorry, I'm not going to have time to do this. Fast pictures, and I'm not going to do this because I just don't have time. But I just wanted to show you 2 last points that are general points. I think this question is not a very good question. If you say talk to your partner about what you usually do after school, the idea is good, but I don't think it works because I don't think it works because it's not very structured. There is no specific goal. How many things do I talk about? If I say after school I do my homework, then at the end we've finished. You could finish straight away and that's it. That's all you've done. Okay, so I don't think it's very structured. What I want to suggest as a simple way of changing your instructions is this. Okay, Find at least 5 things that you and your partner both usually do after school. This is exactly the same idea, but the structure is better. The structure is better because we have a specific goal. It says find 5 things, okay? So not 1, not 2, 5. We have a specific goal. But it's even better because we say at least. That means that the students who are very good and who are very fast, the problem with those students is that very quickly they say, teacher, I finished. What do I do now? Because I've finished. If you say at least, then your students continue. They continue. They stop when you tell them to stop. But at least is a very small way of changing your instructions, but a very positive way of changing your instructions. Very good for mixed ability. We call this open-ended. There is no end to the exercise. Simple words, at least, but if you add them to your instructions, that really helps. And finally, the other thing is that you are creating a good atmosphere in your class because you are talking about things you have in common. So in this exercise, you're helping them to have things in common, to empathize and to relate to their partner. It doesn't always have to be this, but I think particularly at the beginning of the year, it's nice for them to find that they have many similarities between themselves. And I think that also is good in terms of a positive atmosphere in the class. Now, my last 2 things that I wanted to say, these are 2 silly, if you like, they're 2 silly tricks that I use to make sure my students speak in English. One reason why my students sometimes don't speak in English is because they forget. They simply say the first thing that comes into their head, and the first thing that comes into their head is Spanish, because they are Spanish students. So I'm going to show you an example. You're going to learn a bit of Spanish today, okay? But imagine my student says to me, ¿Cómo se dice paraguas en inglés? So this would be very typical. One of my students suddenly says, Oye, ¿cómo se dice paraguas en inglés? So they're speaking to me in Spanish, okay? And I want them to speak in English because they should be able to speak. So what do I say? I say, sorry? And the student probably immediately says, que ¿Cómo se dice paraguas? Because they haven't realized that basically my word sorry is not because I didn't hear them, it's to remind them in a very gentle way, but it's a very simple way to remind them, please speak to me in English. And what often happens is that one of the other students says, say it in English. And I say sorry, and I can say sorry maybe 10 times. Until the student says it to me in English, then I would keep on saying, sorry, sorry, sorry. And in the end, the student realizes, okay, how do you say paraguas in English? And as some of you know, paraguas is umbrella. The example, it's just a simple example, but I do believe sometimes students forget to speak to us in English because they are thinking in Spanish, and that would be normal. Your students will speak in Ukrainian because they're from Ukraine, and it's typical, it's obvious. They're not doing it in a bad way, it's just their first reaction. So one simple way is to encourage them when they speak to you not in English and you want them, just say sorry and sorry and sorry. Okay? And the other way is maybe less gentle, okay? And I call this the X factor, but actually this is pretty serious. If I have a student who is always refusing to speak to me in English, if they do not do pair work, I do believe sometimes that teachers of teenagers, we have to really persuade those students to speak to us in English. And so what I do, I'm sure that you in your class have a mark book, maybe it's a more modern digital mark book. But what I do is for an oral activity, I put at the top of the column, I put the day and the activity. And if somebody is not doing it in English, if somebody is doing it in English, I will put a tick. If somebody is not doing any English when it's easy and when they should be doing it in English, then I give them an X. Now, this is not very modern. This is not very, I don't know, what would you call it? It's not very fashionable, but I think sometimes students need us to push them gently, but push them gently into speaking English. And at the end of the year, if the student has tried to speak in English, because again, I'm not saying they need to do the activity well, but I'm saying that they need to try to do it. If they try to do it, they get a tick. If they don't try at all, they get a cross. And that will be part of my continuous assessment. Okay, so 2 little ideas that work for me. Sometimes I do the gentle approach of sorry, 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 and sometimes I use the more persuasive approach of the mark book. Okay, not very modern, but it works for me. Okay, right, I think we are at the end. Is everybody, thank you, Natalia. I'm glad that you like Gateway. Can you see there on the screen Macmillan Facebook page? I'm sure that some of you, is anybody on the Macmillan Gateway Facebook page? I know there are lots of teachers from the Ukraine there. It's one of the biggest countries for people following the page. There are lots of activities there. There are lots of videos. There will be a new teaching video next week. There are lots of pictures of me in Ukraine as well. I think you can see some new ones this week. There are lots of things there for you. Lots of teaching ideas. 2 or 3 of the ideas that I've used today came from the Gateway Facebook page. So if you are on Facebook, please do join that page. It's a great way to stay in touch. If you ever need to ask any questions, I personally reply to all of your messages. This week, I've been seeing teachers, I've been speaking to teachers from different cities in Ukraine. So it's beautiful to have that contact until the next time that I'm with you. Okay. I don't know if anybody has a final question. Yes, thank you, Oksana. Thank you. It's been a real pleasure, as always. Thank you for all of your participation, okay? I've seen lots of comments from you. You've been answering all my questions, so thanks a lot. I think there will be information now, possibly from Helen, maybe, or from Inna. They will be giving information, maybe just to say goodbye and to talk about the certificate. Thank you so much. It's been nice to join you from my sunny house, my sunny attic in Spain, in Madrid. And I hope to see you again sometime soon. And thank you so much for all of your nice comments and participation. I do hope to see you again. I'm going to turn my sound off.
Thank you very much, David.
Okay. See you again.
We do look forward to seeing you in Kiev, in Odessa, in Kharkiv, generally in Ukraine next year. As usual, your ideas are so helpful and so applicable, and you know that you have lots of fans of Gateway, especially Gateway 2nd edition in Ukraine, and hope you will have even much more followers. Looking forward to seeing you, dear colleagues. In a moment, in your browser, you will see the application form. After filling it, you will be able to download the certificate. We're not posting certificate here right now during the webinar.